Hi everyone and welcome to Transit Online. We are in part 2 of the series What I Really Want, which is a series on temptation. Temptation are the things that we intensely desire to do, but they may not be the best for us. In today's session, we're going to recognize that we're not the only one to face temptation. Everyone faces it, and even Jesus did. And because we're not the only one to face temptation, we don't have to do it alone. So we're going to hear about what we can do when we're facing temptation. So let's get into the lesson.
Hey friends, it's Bobby. So I have a couple questions for you, especially if you have a sweet tooth. So which do you like better, Snickers or Milky Way? Or do you like Crunch or M&Ms? Or how about you like Twix or Starburst? I think out of all these candies, my favorite would probably be the M&Ms. M&Ms are so good. So maybe that stuff isn't that kind of temptation that makes or breaks us. If we choose to give into temptation like eat a little candy or watch a little YouTube or even buy a pair of Nike sneakers, we aren't really doing anything that could have major consequences in the long run. But not all temptations have major consequences. Remember, temptation means wanting to do something that may not be the best for us. So when we're tempted to do things like cheat on a test or fight with our sibling or lie to our best friend or post that rude comment online or even look at inappropriate pictures, we know we're dealing with big stuff that can lead to big consequences. And I don't know about you, but when that happens to me, I find myself wondering what it is that makes me want to do those things I'm not supposed to do. What is it that makes me really want to do something I know isn't good for me? I mean, doesn't that seem odd when you think about it? Usually I avoid what's not good for me. I know it's not good for me to break my leg, so I avoid downhill skiing. I know getting fillings for cavities hurts, so I brush my teeth every day. I do what I can to avoid the stuff that's painful or bad or unhealthy for me. So why don't I do the same thing when it comes to temptation? I don't know about you, but I struggle with this a lot. When I find myself tempted to do something that I know isn't good for me, it makes me wonder what is wrong with me. I mean, why can't I just get it right? If I know what's good for me, why don't I just do it? Is it just me? When it comes to this whole facing temptation thing, is something wrong with me? Maybe you felt the same way. When you found yourself tempted to do something you know isn't good for you, maybe you've wondered, am I bad if I want to do it? Am I bad if I'm already doing it? Am I bad if I'm not getting in trouble for it? Am I bad for thinking about it even if I don't choose to do it? Is something wrong with me? See, I think that one of our biggest struggles when it comes to temptation isn't always about whether or not we give in. It's not always about the choices we make or don't make. Sometimes the hardest things about dealing with temptation is how it makes us feel about ourselves. I mean, are we bad? Are we wrong? Are we the only ones who struggle with this? And can I let you in on a secret? The answer to the struggle that you might be facing when it comes to temptation can be found by looking at Jesus himself. Like, did you know that Jesus dealt with temptation? Crazy, right? Like the one that died for our sins. Like the one that never, and I mean never made a mistake or misstep. The one who is the Son of God himself. Even he dealt with temptation. I don't know about you, but just knowing that makes me feel better. See, just before Jesus started traveling and teaching about God while he was here on earth, he went to the desert to pray and fast and prepare for what was to come. That might seem weird to us, but for Jesus, it was completely normal. He wanted to spend his days talking to his Father and away from any distractions, including food. I mean, Jesus was basically a superhero. But right at the end, on day 40, the temptations started. I mean, have you noticed that temptation finds us in a similar way? It usually comes when we're not our best selves. Like when we're super tired or really lonely or when we're like fed up with life, that's when temptation shows up and it's hardest to resist. That happened with Jesus too. Now, it's true that Jesus wasn't tempted to steal a cool pair of jeans or to go too far with someone he's dating or to stay up all night and play video games like we might be, but he was tempted over and over again. And when he was tired, lonely, hot, and hungry, Jesus faced the temptation to give into what wasn't his Father's best for him. And while we ultimately know that he didn't give into those things he was tempted with, we also know this, that Jesus understands temptation. We see this in the book of the Bible called Hebrews. Hebrews is in the New Testament, the part of the Bible that was written about Jesus and the start of the Christian church. In the world at the time this was written, there was a lot of temptation to turn away from God and enjoy what looked like an easier life. So, in an effort to help them out, the writer of Hebrews wrote them a letter. Did the letter say that these were bad people because they faced temptation? Did it say that they weren't being faithful followers of Jesus? Did it say that they were wrong? Let's take a look. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are. Yet he did not sin. I think we need to break this down a little. The phrase high priest is used to describe Jesus here. The role of the high priest in the Jewish culture, where most of the audience would have come from, was to act as the middle person between followers of God and God himself. But when Jesus died and came back to life, he became the ultimate high priest, removing anything that would keep us from God. So when the writer said that we have a high priest who empathizes and understands our weaknesses and temptations, he was talking about Jesus. So, does temptation mean you're bad or wrong or not good enough? Not at all. Because the reality is everybody faces temptation. You, me, your teachers, your siblings, your parents, your best friend, even Jesus himself. Everybody faces temptation. And because of that, we can know that we're not failing or struggling or facing it alone when we deal with it. Remember, even Jesus himself faced temptation. And Jesus also never made any mistakes. Not a single one. So, what does that tell us? It tells us that facing temptation isn't wrong. It's not the desire to do something that's wrong. It's what you choose to do with that desire that can lead you down the wrong path. The last part of the verse reminds us that when he was faced with temptation, Jesus made the choice to resist. He didn't let it lead him into making a bad decision. And the same can be true for us. Temptation doesn't have to lead into sin. And I think one of the things that can help us choose not to give in and move toward a mistake is remembering that in facing temptation, we're not alone. We can remember that in Jesus, we find somebody who gets it. Remember, everybody faces temptation. And because we know that's true, here are a few things we can do the next time we find ourselves struggling with temptation. First, remember what's true about you. Bad choices don't make us bad people. One mistake doesn't mean you've messed up for good. The desire to do something we know we shouldn't doesn't make us anything other than human. So, when we find ourselves facing temptation, we need to remember what's true. We are God's good creation. We are loved and known and understood by him. And there's nothing we can do that will change anything about what he says is true about us. Second, invite Jesus into it. Remember, Jesus understands what we're feeling when we face temptation. He gets it, and because of that, he can help us stand firm when we're facing it. If you're dealing with temptation to do something you know isn't good for you, invite Jesus into it. Ask for his help. Pray that he'll remind you that he not only loves you, but he understands you. Last, invite someone else into it. Since everybody, and I mean everybody, faces temptation, that means there are friends, trusted adults, and other people in your life who also know what you're going through. Because of that, you don't have to face temptation alone. Tell a trusted friend or an adult, like a group leader, about it. Invite them to encourage, support, and walk with you as you work to choose God's best for your life. That's why we do groups. Your leaders and friends in your group can be so helpful in navigating this stuff with you. Remember, everybody faces temptation, and that means you can face it together.
So when we find ourselves struggling with temptation, we can remind ourselves of what God says about us. Everybody faces temptation, but that's not what defines us. So let's remind ourselves of what's true. God created you, knows you, and loves you. Next, we can invite Jesus into our temptation. He gets us, and he can help us. And last, invite someone else into it. A small group leader, a friend, a parent. You don't have to face things alone. That's what small group is for. we can face and overcome temptations together. So that's all for today. Thanks for joining us. Come back next week for part 3 of What I Really Want. Bye.